How and why might artists obscure or obfuscate information? Today, let's investigate how two artists' books use and interpret concealment techniques. Erika Van Horn's An Album of Interiors presents a delightful collection of security envelope interior patterns. And Veronika Schäpers' 2 to the 11th power encrypts and distances us from a published short story. Based in Ireland since 1996, Erika Van Horn is an American artist and writer who runs Coracle Press with her husband, the poet Simon Cutts. Her work frequently presents wry or humorous observations on local customs, ephemera, and other often overlooked details. Van Horn has collected security envelope interiors for decades. She uses them in numerous artist books, as well as site-specific installations in museums and private spaces. An Album of Interiors presents 15 tipped-in security envelope samples, with brief narratives written by Van Horn. Her texts range from design commentary to self-reflection and personal memories. The first sample accompanies a touching recollection of her friend Tullio, to whom this book is dedicated. Her words encapsulate connections to people and the indifference of time to future plans and dreams. I was already enamored of the tiny circles that make up this pattern, but the fact that it was Tullio's enduring favorite made me look closer. I considered what attracts me to this pattern and wondered about the person who loved it. The samples in An Album of Interiors come from all over the world. The styles and colors of the security patterns vary throughout the book. Van Horn offers practical information about the pattern designs. Her brief text suggests that she examines these graphics for usage, provenance, and history. She explained to me, "I am interested in both my visual art and in my writing to pare things down and to use the simplest methods possible to make my point. My written texts are an exercise in distillation." Van Horn's depth of knowledge, amassed from years of collecting, comes through in her words, along with a sense of her personality. Her note of the unusual colors in this Royal Mail interior is accompanied by a slightly acerbic statement about print versus electronic. When I first read this book, I was smitten with the way Van Horn elevates the ephemeral and everyday by presenting them so formally alongside her observations. As communication has moved more digital over recent decades, security envelopes are much less prevalent or even necessary. Looking at these samples, it occurred to me that this is an interesting moment to excavate, when time and technology shift the commonplace into something antiquated or more rare. When I asked Van Horn why she chose ovals for the samples, she said, "Squares or rectangles felt too dull and kind of lifeless. The oval suggested an old-fashioned kind of presentation. The very idea of an album seemed to require a level of consistency in presentation." Van Horn's straightforward layout focuses my attention on the patterns, and I consider why they would have been designed for the businesses that used them. Some make me wonder. I can understand why a bank would have security envelopes to protect private financial data, but why would a company that replaces lost or broken china and crystalware need such a level of discretion? I'm charmed by this pattern, but surprised that such a company would have commissioned a custom design for their envelopes. A funny insight into Van Horn's own collecting accompanies the final sample in An Album of Interiors. She recognizes her own inadvertent encroachment into other people's privacy as she hunts for new and unique security envelope interiors to feed her insatiable curiosity and collection. Veronika Schäpers' books regularly focus on observations of social phenomena in foreign cultures. Currently based in Germany, she previously spent 16 years in Japan studying and independently producing artist books. Her materials, techniques, and content typically incorporate Eastern and Western influences. Schäpers' artist books feature many conceptual processes and non-traditional forms, but they always develop from texts written by another author. Literature is the foundation of each of her books. 2 to the 11th Power evolved out of a Japanese short story that fascinated her. Schäpers wanted to print a German translation, but after much preliminary work and many attempts for permission to publish it, she was unable to receive approval. The slipcase does not present an obvious entry point. It's a bit of a puzzle. Although it's not actually difficult to access, opening the case is not intuitive. When I figure it out, it's like breaking something or cracking it open to get inside. We have another layer to pass through. A thick, semi-translucent wrapper encloses the book. Unfolding it reveals diagrams of interior spaces. 2 groups of words are printed in their own subtle rectangles. I look for relationships between these nouns and verbs, but struggle to identify a comprehensive meaning. The book progresses mysteriously. Images of what I think are cups and bowls on the first spread become more abstract as we turn the pages. The paper changes. Thin and delicate, this new paper is shiny with a beautiful light crinkle and high transparency. Materials are important to Schäpers, and I'm sensitive to the sound, feel, and look of this Gambi paper. What follows are 20 pages of words. They lack any grammatical formatting, like paragraphs or punctuation. The monospace font printed on these translucent papers hinders readability. The typeface reminds me of the optical recognition fonts designed in the 1960s to be legible by both humans and computers of that era. I do, however, note the perfect registration visible through layers of pages, a testament to Schäpers' exacting skills and craftsmanship. All of these words derive from the English translation of that original Japanese short story, converted through a complex process. Schäpers never received permission to print a German translation. Her repeated requests were ignored or denied by the author's descendants and publisher. She had already devoted countless hours to this project, which she didn't want to waste. Above all, more than a decade after initially trying to work with this text, she was still fascinated and compelled to somehow publish the story. So she began to explore ways to obfuscate the original text, such as printing it in binary code. 2 to the 11th Power comes with a separate booklet that provides background and insight into Schäpers' processes toward concealment. Binary code was too long, so she ultimately decided to have the original Japanese story and the English translation professionally encrypted by Jorn Mueller-Quaid, professor of cryptology at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. Schäpers lists a step-by-step overview of the encryption, which, frankly, extends beyond my comprehension. What I do understand is that through the encryption process, the original short story has transformed into a massive set of unrelated words. So the story is there in some form, but inaccessible to the reader. Even though these words are not intentionally or meaningfully connected, as readers, we can't help but create our own associations between them. Elephant, expose, shrub, hockey, square, goat, milk. The English words give way to colorful rectangles. The simple shape and big flats of color are a relief after being immersed in the tiny, difficult-to-read text. These 20 colors were mentioned in the original short story. Schäpers selected the hues based on what she imagined from the words. Through 2 to the 11th power, Schäpers has created an exploration of subjective interpretation. We bring our associations to the random words from the encryption. Likewise, we respond to her impressions of the colors she read in that original story. At this point, we come to Japanese words. Based on the page design and vertical orientation of the right-to-left reading Japanese text, I assume that I'm at the end of this section. Indeed, if I close the book and turn to the other cover, here is the front of the book in Japanese. Again, we begin with pictures. Like the images we saw on the other side of the book, Schäpers has made these collaged illustrations from scaled, disassembled, and collaged photos of objects mentioned in the original story. This process runs parallel to the action of encrypting the text. And like the words, we bring our own interpretations to these assemblages. To me, these collaged images look like living beings. Perhaps they are characters from the story, made up of objects they use or that represent them in some way. Mirroring the flow of the other side of the book, we come to pages and pages of Japanese words set in monospaced letters. The English and Japanese sides of Schäpers' book are not translations of each other. These Japanese words resulted from encrypting the Japanese short story. A separate encryption of the English translation produced the English words on the other side of the book. I asked Schäpers why she chose to lay out the book in this mirrored way, with Japanese and English coming together from the outside covers. She told me she thought carefully about the choreography of the book and how it becomes a kind of performance. She wanted to make a book that you could enjoy reading, even if it couldn't be read in the classical way. Schäpers never reveals the original author or title. This makes sense to protect herself because she never received permission. But more importantly, we only need to know that there was an original text. Her persistent desire to publish this story shifted the project from a book presenting a direct translation into one that explores concealment and subsequent interpretation through barriers. Schäpers removed the possibility of the reader directly responding to the original text and her interpretations of it. Presented with these abstractions and no sense of the narrative, we can become more aware of how we perceive and interpret the deconstructed elements she does give us. How do we apply meaning to adjacent words, images, and color? I think differently about these simple diagrams as I replace the book in the wrapper. The visual language is akin to the monospace font, utilitarian and devoid of emotion. It is another minimal framework upon which we impose our perceptions, associations, and interpretations. Through the lens of Van Horn's commentaries, an album of interiors examines patterns that hide the contents of an envelope. 2 to the 11th power uses encryption to create such an impenetrable barrier to a text that we exceed the original story and are left with our own subjective responses and interpretations. Both books bring us into the material and conceptual acts of concealing information.